Hi everyone, this is Craig Zelzer from PCDN Global, here from Medellin, Colombia, with Bidjan Nashat from Atlas Corps in the DC area. I'm delighted to be with Bidjan today, and we're on season 10, episode 15. I think that is right. So welcome everyone. Just turning off the volume on LinkedIn. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about talent is everywhere, and now opportunity can be too. That is one of my favorite sayings, and I don't know who originally said it, but that talent is universally distributed. Opportunity to date is not, but obviously we're doing better. For those who have not participated in a social change career podcast live stream before, they generally last about 50 minutes. I'll start off with asking some questions, and we love to hear from people who are watching this, particularly on LinkedIn. In the chat box, if you can let us know where you're watching from, a sentence or two about your background, and start asking your questions and comments, because we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. This is one of over 100 episodes of the podcast. This will be converted to a podcast episode in about 3 to 4 weeks, but please check out the other episodes with people and innovators from all around the world like Bidjan, who share their honest career journeys, tips for upskilling, for careers of impact, and also their warnings. The one request that I have, if you are listening to this podcast live or in the future, well, two requests. One, please check out Atlas Corps. They're amazing. We'll talk about their work, and Bidjan, follow Bidjan on LinkedIn and other channels. But two, if you take 30 seconds to rate the podcast on any platform, it helps grow our reach and impact. So Bidjan is a serial social entrepreneur. He's currently the CEO of Atlas Corps, a social enterprise institution for global talent. I like to refer to it as almost like a reverse Peace Corps, but we'll talk about that. Previously, he was the Global Program Quality and Impact Director at Save the Children International. He led the refugee response for Save the Children Germany as Programs and Advocacy Director in 2015 and 2016, and worked previously on strategy and evidence at the World Bank, and was part of the team that started Teach First Deutschland, which is a partner of the Teach for All global network. Bidjan grew up in the American sector of West Berlin as the son of an immigrant from Iran and a German mother. He lives with his wife and daughter in the Washington, D.C. area. He has an MA from the Hertie School in Public Policy in Germany. And Bidjan, thank you so much for joining us. And again, please start putting your questions and comments. And as we go throughout the podcast, let us know where you're watching from. I'm just going to check. We have a few people introducing themselves. So Ali, let us know not just your names, but also let us know where you're watching from, and I'll bring that into the conversation. So Bidjan, thank you so much for joining us. And just to start off, can you talk a little bit about the type of change that you've been seeking to advance throughout your career?
Thank you, Craig, for having me. And I agree with you. This notion of talent is everywhere. And it's very prominent on your website as well. It's the founding principle of Atlas Corps. So for me, it's two things. It's a combination of two things. It started over 20 years ago when I was doing civilian service instead of the military in Germany. And I spent a year working at a hospital at the very bottom of the hierarchy. And I realized and noticed what bad leadership can do. And I am obsessed almost, I would say, with organizations and how they can form teams and form a culture that actually makes a difference for others and also creates belonging. That's one. And then I'm always interested in organizations and in people who make a difference. And that was part of my career as well. And the two combined actually have led me to Atlas Corps. I'm fascinated with the opportunity to create talent journeys and to really create leadership growth for people everywhere, regardless of where they come from, and break through some of that bias and really enable access and a network to create opportunities, similarly to what you do.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I've been a huge fan of Atlas Corps since they launched. And can you talk a little bit more, whether it's at the World Bank or Save the Children during, the mass migration of a lot of people from Syria to Germany, just prior to Atlas Corps, like what were some of the key issues you worked on, apart from leadership and talent? And, a lot of people know the Teach for All network, or at least Teach for America. So it sounds like you were part of the founding team. So, what are some of the challenges and opportunities you worked on across the different areas?
Maybe I'll pick the refugee response because it's been a very intense experience. And you have to imagine, right, a million people from Syria alone and hundreds of thousands of youth and children making their way to Germany, and us deciding for the first time, not only doing efforts abroad, but really investing in creating a refugee and an emergency response. And if you hadn't been involved in a response before, the challenge is, how do you plan, but also how do you react right away? And that's the challenge in humanitarian work. So what we did was really gather all the evidence and all the support we had from a global network of Save the Children. We brought in experts, a diverse team, and we worked with corporate partners and the government to set up child-friendly spaces in Berlin and in other countries, in other states of Germany, to really make sure right when children arrive, we don't lose them. We don't lose out on their education. We don't lose out on protecting them against violence that often happens when it's a chaotic situation. And we also create shelter. We give them access to education and just play in a safe environment. And that really challenged us as a team. It challenged us as an organization. But looking back, given all the partnerships that we were able to create, we supported thousands and thousands of children and youth in a moment when German society really had to shift and come around to support 1 million people coming to Germany. That area where I've learned a lot, we were challenged a lot, and it's also a case study in leadership in crisis of many people who showed up and responded.
And you know, we live in Colombia, and Colombia, similar to Germany, you know, and I'd say Uganda, there's very few countries, you know, maybe Pakistan, that are super welcoming of migrants or refugees. And Colombia has huge challenges, huge internally displaced population, but we do have almost 2 million Venezuelan migrants or refugees living here. And about 1.5 years ago, the previous president, who was not very popular, had a 25% approval rating, did make a pretty brave decision to say that Venezuelans in residence in Colombia up to a certain date could get legal residence here, access to benefits, and stay for up to 10 years. So it doesn't apply to all, let's say 1.6, 1.8 million Venezuelans, but a huge number.
And opportunities to work as well, right?
Yes, yeah, education, work. Yeah. I mean, and Colombia is not a rich country. It has, you know, yeah. So it's. Can you just talk a little bit before we get to Atlas Corps? So what was it like to, you know, you started working at Save the Children? Were you hired in response to this challenge, or you were working on other programming globally? And, you know, how in the what are your lessons for someone who works in the development and international sector? You know, what was it like to? I mean, one, it's such a huge crisis. It's still going on, unfortunately, in Syria and many places. But what was it like to build the infrastructure for that and to, you know, find ways to help people settle legally and get the support, you know, whether it's economic, education, mental, psychosocial support?
Maybe to start, Syria played a huge role, the revolution and the war, in my career decision, because I was working at the World Bank for 5 years and realized, although I'm a big nerd and I love analysis and data and monitoring and evaluation, you know, seeing what happened over in the Arab Spring, but then also in the Syrian revolution, made me change and shift my career. I wanted to be able to tell my kids I did something really relevant while one of the biggest regional and global crises took place. And that made me move back to Germany and join the Save the Children team. At the time, it was a small part of Save the Children. And over the coming years, we prepared a work on migration and refugees because it had been a passion for me. I started as program and advocacy director there. And because we were prepared to focus on these issues, when the crisis hit, we were able to respond. I really think, you know, at the end of the day, what really makes a difference is how you don't only focus on yourself, not only as a team and as an organization, even if you're a large federation, but how you focus on partnerships. So we had unlikely partners like IKEA and their foundation, who provided us with the entire housing and the entire renovation of all those child-friendly spaces and a lot of other support. We had unlikely efforts, right? Unlikely partners like the Boston Consulting Group, who sent an entire team over to us to help us organize and create project management structures in an environment that we weren't that familiar with. We were responding every single day. And then lastly, it took the effort of the entire organization, including the CEO, but also the board, to say, we're going to invest money in this from our own funds, from our own reserves, because this needs to happen right now. And then we will go out and create supporters and get their support. One of the highlights was to actually be able this links to your Colombia example, to actually be able to hire refugees and people who were fleeing, who brought amazing assets to Germany. You see this in the labor market data right now, which is a longer topic, but to be able to hire them onto our team who spoke the language, knew the culture, had worked with Save the Children in Jordan or in other countries, for example, we're able to support our teams right away and work with children.
In the chat, we had Anne, who was the founder of the Ready School for Digital Design, which does a lot of work on building the capacity. So you can listen to that podcast episode. It's a really interesting example of helping migrants and refugees build tech careers in partnership with
she and the team did amazing work. Yes. Are still.
Yes, they still are. I'll just share one story, then we'll move on. I lived in Hungary for 3 years in the early 90s, and the war in Yugoslavia obviously was happening. And I was in Yugoslavia, not in the fighting areas during the war. Again, if you want to talk about history changing, so both in the early 90s, Germany was the European country that took the most number of refugees from Yugoslavia. And I had a girlfriend from West Berlin, and so I would go back and forth some and just seeing, a lot of people had really challenging conditions, but Germany did open its arms at that point. It'd be nice if we had no more people who were forced to flee because of violence or natural disasters. But if you think back to German history, it is really interesting. It's become still lots of challenges, but it's become one of the most welcoming countries in Europe compared to a lot of its neighbors. But
that would be a whole nother podcast. But it really emphasizes, for me, this lesson emphasizes the role of schools and education, because I was in high school when the refugees from Bosnia and Yugoslavia came. And that's where integration takes place. And I've seen this over and over in so many countries. When you're able to bring young people together in a school environment, and you force them to learn, not everybody likes their teachers, that forms a community, and that forms knowing who the other is and what to know and learn about them. The same way the integration between East and West took place in Germany, it took place in schools.
So just gonna say again, welcome Ali, welcome Nazir, welcome Christina from RippleWorks. She works on recruitment. RippleWorks is one of the coolest organizations in the world. Please check them out. Welcome Bashir from Nigeria. Welcome Ali sharing. He's an Atlas Core Fellow, so you probably know him, working with Partnership for Children. Welcome Mohit from Michigan. Let's see, Bashir is working with IOM in Nigeria, working on peace building. Sade, I think, is from Ethiopia. So please let us know where you're watching from, and please bring in your questions and comments. So can you talk a little bit, I have a million different questions, but just Atlas Core. Obviously, I knew Scott. Scott's moved on to Peace Corps, which is a great global organization. Abby, so that Atlas Core really started with a different vision. So you can talk about its origins and the focus of Atlas Core currently, and also how people can engage.
Well, I got the opportunity to still work with Scott because he's on our board, our founder. So Atlas Core started in 2006 as a social enterprise. And really, as you mentioned, with this idea of enabling volunteers to also serve in the US, like you said, as a reverse Peace Corps, we did that very successfully for over 15 years. Then the pandemic comes, right, and challenges some of the work we do in person. And the team and the leadership responded brilliantly by taking a lot of what we do virtually, with the Virtual Leadership Institute and with the support of the Hilton Foundation and American embassies, to take what we've learned over 15 years and really engage people everywhere, regardless of whether they make it to the US, with leadership development. Develop self, others, lead movements. Really that notion, and that's what we're taking to scale, while we continue the fellowship now that the pandemic is not over, but things have been opening up again in most places. And so those two services, those two efforts that we lead, really help us define the future of work. I believe that coming out of the pandemic, we're in a unique space where organizations and leaders have realized you can work from anywhere. And that extends equity to people who haven't had those opportunities, as you in the network also experience. So we have people who have moved and have been displaced, are refugees, are in countries where the borders are closed, but we can still enable remote fellowships. We can still enable remote leader development and create community and global citizenship. And that's something, because I get to engage with people who are on this call as well, and people who are all over the globe every single week, that's extremely motivating to see that energy, that talent, and that potential. And we want to find, grow, and connect those young professionals with organizations that make a difference.
So for people who may not, and you've got a bunch of Atlas Core current and past fellows, so again, welcome Fidelis. Feel free to tag the organization where you worked or were working. Welcome Nana, I know you're from CEU, from the Hertie School, so hopefully you know Bidjan. So can you talk a little bit for people who are not aware of Atlas Core? One, occasionally you hire staff positions, you have virtual fellowships, you have in-person fellowships, so how can people engage? How big is the community? What countries do they come from? And in particular, what are the skills or aptitudes or qualifications that you look for in potential fellows, whether it's virtual or in person?
Great. So hi, Nena. And she was also really, really keen to engage with you as an alum from Central European University, I know. So on Atlas Core, for the two programs, so the first one, the Virtual Leadership Institute, really has a wide range. We currently work with young leaders and young professionals from Pakistan, for example, where we focus on a partnership with the American Embassy and two of our alumni organizations. And what we're able to do, and the people we're looking for, are young social entrepreneurs between the ages of their early 20s to mid 30s. And we're looking for people who want to make a difference. We're looking for people who really want to grow themselves, show and grow their self-awareness, their emotional intelligence, really are interested in connecting as global citizens and make a difference for others. Part of the program of the Virtual Leadership Institute is really to apply what you have learned in a community impact project to make a difference. And we support that with some funds that people can apply for. We want change that is applied and on the ground as a result of leadership development. For the fellowship, we're looking for a few years of experience and usually a university degree. Also extends to 25 to 35-year-olds in most cases. And we're looking for people who have a few years of relevant experience in a few areas, for example, monitoring, evaluation, data analysis, program and project management, but also areas like HR and supply chain. Organizations that are looking for that talent are in our network, and that's what we do. We bridge that gap between talent and opportunities to make a difference by connecting them to these organizations. Some of them are remote now, but many of them are in the US. And then we organize the entire journey of that talent from their home country to the US into a team, and we support that 1-year fellowship through our work and by building a community of mentors, peers, and coaches.
Okay. So just two logistical things. And one is, can you talk a little bit about the application process? And I mean, I will say I've been very fortunate to have multiple fellowships, not because I'm smart. I've had really good mentors and I've mentored many people in fellowships. So Bidjan and I were talking prior to the start of the podcast that one really good way to upskill is, there's grad school, there's self-learning, there's peer learning, there's certificate programs, there's online learning. There are a whole range of fellowships, particularly in the social entrepreneurship space, that you can leverage to upskill your career, build credentials. And so Atlas Core is one, but can you talk a little bit like, do you get 3,000 applications for 30 spots? So just that people are aware and what makes for a competitive application. And then the other thing is on your leadership curriculum, how much is open source? Because it is really cool. So are you sharing it with the world for people who are not in the Atlas Core community, or how do people look at the skills that you're all defining as critical for 21st century change makers?
Great questions. So the first one, what we're really looking for is we need to have English language skills because the work takes place in English. We need to have written skills. We need to see what are you passionate about? Which social issue area are you really passionate about? And we need to see a proof of your relevant experience and how you have solved problems in your current career journey. That's what's really important for the fellowship journey. Since last year, and we're investing a lot more in the recruitment and vetting area, we've been partnering with Zurich University on applying some of the emotional intelligence testing and vetting. We want to look into those areas where we can see the potential of candidates to become leaders over time and prove that to organizations with analysis too. That's an area we're investing in. So Lots more to come. Your other question on whether it's proprietary, we do a lot of events that are actually open to the community and some of them to the public as well. It's a balance, right? Because we're building a community of leaders ourselves. So some of the events and some of the work and the training that we do, we keep to our cohorts, but a good portion of them are actually open to the public. And I'd love for people to follow us all over social media and then to join those events, apply to those programs. On average, over the years, we had thousands and thousands of applicants. One of the Virtual Leadership Institute cohorts, they are more targeted toward the partners we work with. As I mentioned, we work with the Hilton Foundation, so that is specifically focused on people within some of the best humanitarian organizations, thousands of people across the globe, and the leadership development that I think they deserve. And then there are national areas where we focus on Pakistan. We focused heavily on Russia, especially now and previously during the war, to really keep the connection to social entrepreneurs who are cut off from the world. So we're hoping to extend those opportunities to as many people as possible. It requires all of us to work together to find the resources to enable that, but we're hoping to do that as much and at scale in the coming years.
Okay. Thank you so much. And Nana's just sharing a little bit about the Hertie School. And I did my master's at Central European University where Nana used to work. So please feel free to check out the Hertie School and Central European University. So Bidjan, a question here is, you really are let's say, expert, at least an innovator in leadership. And you've got a nice, both an organizational view and a global view. So for people who are either, the question is like, who defines themselves as a change maker? Like Ashoka used to be, there are, change makers used to be more like their fellows, and then they adopted the slogan and the practice that anyone can be a change maker. So for people who are aspiring or already working in social impact, what are some skills that you've all identified as the most crucial? And do you have any suggestions for ways people can strengthen or start to develop those skills? Obviously there's Atlas Corporate. Where else do you recommend people go?
That is a great question. It took me years to develop some of those as well, and they're still developing, obviously, because we all grow. I'm going to give you one example and then maybe touch upon a few others. Last week, we did a workshop with our community that I led on developing a 10-point overview of what it means to work with me. And it sounds weird, but actually what it is it's training your self-awareness to describe both your strengths, but also your challenges. So what are your growth areas? What are the areas where you need to let other people know, sometimes when I'm under stress, I tend to do X. And for me, this came out of years and years of coaching and developing and doing leadership training. But it also developed because I really wanted to step into this Atlas Core role and build on previous lessons. So what I did was I drafted a few bullet points, and then I sent it to my previous teams and direct reports and got a lot of feedbacks. So that I then included, and one of my former colleagues at Save the Children said, at times you have a shiny object syndrome, where you really fall in love with new things and you want to do new things, but we need to deliver and implement on the things that we've already set out to do. And there was really helpful feedback. I included it in one of those points. So this is something that you can do. And this, to me, is really, really crucial. Develop your self-awareness skills. Know how you work with others, what others need to know about you, and the areas where you want to grow as a leader. I think this is something very concrete that everyone can do based on what you have studied, based on where you've worked. And it starts a really nice conversation with people you work with, people you trust, because it encourages them to be open to you about both your strengths, but also about the areas where they say, sometimes I try to talk to you, but I don't really see you're listening. Please, next time, why don't you make me aware of that? It can start a great conversation. So that's a very concrete thing that I try to have people do in my team, but also in our community.
And I was having a conversation with someone very senior earlier today from the ESG field, environment and sustainable and governance investing. And we were talking about leadership. And so do you have a personal philosophy of leadership that's been named, or just a set of approaches, or a favorite professor, or someone who's an innovator in this field that you've adapted, or it's more fluid?
It's I mean, the big one is that leadership matters when you're not there.
Mhm.
And it matters when you're away, or it matters when you have left an organization. So really focusing on the legacy. And 10 years ago, when I stepped into my first management leadership role at Save the Children, I was teaching a workshop at a business school, and we applied one of these really helpful tools. It's coming out of a Harvard Business School article that's called Developing Your Own Leadership Purpose Statement. And it makes you really work through, what is the contribution that I want to leave, that I am purpose-driven to leave. And for me, and I've written this down somewhere, I want to make people and organizations who are fighting for worthy causes better at what they do by leading people, sharing what I know, and researching and writing about what I've learned. And it's from 10 years ago, and I think it still applies. And then what I did was I broke it down. Okay, in my Save the Children Germany job, here's what I want to have achieved over the course of 5 years. And most of it was focused on where I wanted young talent to grow. And I think it's fitting that I'm now at Atlas Corps, because the thing that gave me the most reward was seeing younger people really thrive in leadership roles, and seeing the person who started as an intern at Save the Children now taken my role that I left behind at Save the Children. Those are the things that come down for me when you think about a leadership definition. It's what you leave behind and what you build, especially in people.
So it sounds like there might be a book germinating there, or a podcast or something. So I'm no pressure, but maybe stay tuned.
It's already out there.
No, but I think there's something about decentralized global organizations where, the learning, and it's also just learning, both your own learning, but across, because Atlas Corps Fellows, if you include the virtual and in-person programs, is it 2,000, 3,000, 5,000? Like, what's the size of the
It's close
fellows?
to 2,000.
Okay.
And depending on how you count it, what I find really fascinating is, I've done the analysis recently, because I really think there's potential for a global talent pool of people who have had that experience, and people who have been vetted by us are in a semi-finalist pool, and we can create opportunities for all right now. I really believe, and this is part of the work that you do, creating opportunities directly for people who have that talent, connect them to organizations in their home countries or regions or globally, is something that I would love for Atlas Corps to be engaged in going forward.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity there, and challenges. So one question, since you also have an interesting perspective, not just on the talent, but the organizations where talent is getting placed, do you see in the next few years, for people who want to work in impact, I mean, obviously it can be nonprofit, for-profit, foundation, social enterprise, but do you see any skill areas where the organizations where your talent is getting placed, where they have deficits, and they're really, maybe they're saturated with people who do X, a lot of organizations are saying we really need more talent, whether it's data science or financial management or training. Are there some areas where you see there's not as much skills or talent available, where organizations are starting to recruit for more?
Again, I don't want to suggest that I have the comprehensive answer for every sector. I really think the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report is exciting in that respect, because if you follow it every single year, it points to analytic skills, creative and problem-solving skills, and empathy, and some of the soft skills. They're called soft skills, but they're not soft. They're really important, as becoming more and more and more important. Intercultural competence, those areas. I would say there is, and in science, usually you say it's a necessary but not a sufficient condition. So necessary absolutely is the experience and the skills, the functional skills in areas such as analyzing data, being able to project manage, being able to really map out and think strategically about the change you want to introduce to an organization is really, really crucial in each of the areas that you are in. What I think is that addition that the World Economic Forum and many other research organizations are pointing to is these key leadership skills: analytic, creative, problem solving, and the skills to actually understand people in different cultures and manage that. That's building on my own experience, but also on the research and all the surveys that talk to employers right now.
Thank you. Yeah, the World Economic Forum, you can skim or read the whole thing, but it really has great data. And also for people, whether you're in the impact space or private sector, wherever, just if you want to think about the skills to continue developing or where jobs might be going, it's a really critical read. So welcome, Sunil. Thanks for sharing about some of your work working with teacher reform in India. Again, feel free to bring in your questions and comments. So a related question, I don't have this person's name, but they're very happy to hear about empathy and emotional intelligence. So a related question is, as a CEO, Atlas Core is not huge, but it's not tiny, and the impact is large. Can you talk a little bit about what is your typical day or week like? So how much is securing funds and talking to donors or partners? How much is working with the team? How much is doing outreach or strategic thinking? How much is engaging with the board? Or just every day is totally different. And for people who aspire to a leadership role, any reflections? You talked about kind of that 10 years ago, some of the visioning that you did around your skills at Save the Children Germany, but any recommendations for people who are mid-career and are aspiring to get to, whether it's the CEO or COO level?
So there's two questions. I think I start with the latter.
Okay.
You have to feel energy about being out there and talking about a vision for the organization and engaging people. And you don't have to be an extrovert, right? I think you can do a lot of things one-on-one, and many introverts are good at one-on-one. You don't have to stand in front of 1,000 people, but if you want to aspire toward a CEO role, you're the spokesperson for the organization, and you have to bring in supporters and inspire people about the organization and its future. And I think that's the key ingredient for fundraising as well, because nobody's out there just saying, please give me money. You're telling people about what could be and what the vision is and what the impact could be if you work together. And that's a lot of my job, and I want and need to do more of it to really engage people. The other part, and really coming into my first CEO role, was understanding and building the strategy and the vision coming out of the pandemic for the products. And I'm a huge fan of Anmai Chang's book, Lean Impact, because it really focuses on, you need to focus on creating value for your clients, for the people you serve. You need to focus on proving your social impact, and you need to focus on a way in which you can scale what matters, what you do for others, and how you can scale your impact. And so a lot of time has been spent with the team and with the people who have joined the team to really engage on how do we create value for the people we serve, both for the organizations and for young talent. How do we prove our social impact and do research partnerships to invest in that? And then how would a path to scale for Atlas Core look like? That's what I've spent a lot of thinking time, but also doing time on with the team. And it's been extremely fun and has inspired me to go out there and be part of those conversations with others.
Yeah. And apologies for the two questions. And then, you talked, and Mei Chang, I think, is now head of Candide, which is a wonderful resource for all things philanthropy. So please check them out, because they really do a lot of data collection, and they have a good job board and fellowship. So it's really a great resource. Any other recommendations for people who aspire to a leadership role? Any cautions? Because I will say I've helped start some small organizations, and I've burnt out multiple times. One organization, we were all equals. So we got up to 300,000 or 400,000 in revenue. We're going to take over the world. And we set aside a good amount of admin money to grow the organization as we were finishing our PhDs. And in the end, it was full-time work for half-time pay and no benefits. And because we were all equals, there was so I got very frustrated on kind of the fundraising chain. But any other recommendations? So, you're talking about effective communicator, being able to vision, being able to strategize about products. Any other thought? Obviously, it depends on the type of leadership role.
You mentioned this already, and I think it's really important to expect these roles are fun every single day is right, especially if you're a social entrepreneur. If you want to do a lot with not a lot of resources, it is frustrating. So it really comes down to, you mentioned, right, burnout. You mentioned mental health and well-being. I think this is an area that not only in the development and humanitarian field, but everywhere coming out of the pandemic, we have a lot to learn and a lot of resilience to build. And so for me, that means being out there and doing things that are different from work. For me, it's soccer and basketball. For me, it's really making sure I have mentors and coaches. And lastly, it's for me really planning. This might sound simple, but planning the year in a way that makes you spend in-person time with people who you love and who give you energy. And I've learned this over time, being burned out myself at times and taking breaks for the first time before this Atlas Corps job after a really intense pandemic response. I really now am focusing much more on the only way for the organization to be successful is if I'm well. And we have a lot of this, right? That we focus on the area, the organization, and we give everything because we want to do well and we want to do good, but it's not sustainable. And so that's I think the pandemic has also been a wake-up call for many people. So that area of mental health and well-being and making sure you are okay before others is really important.
Thank you so much. So welcome, Apim, and then we've got lots of comments coming in, but I'll just say two things. So we have Catalina and I work together. It's a whole nother story, working with your partner. But, we have a 12-year-old son and, and he's a very competitive soccer player. So I could be workaholic. I'm much less workaholic than I used to be, but it's like having a kid who wants to play soccer all the time or FIFA or going to games. And then having that community is so important, because there's people I'll go to, like when I have an ethical question, like, obviously I'll talk to Catalina, but sometimes I'll call Nick Martin from Tech Change or like the people can be like, what do you think? Like, is this a wise decision or what is the challenge here? What's the lesson? Having that community, whether it's peers or mentors, is so important because there are ethical challenges. And for any recommendations, for events or conferences or online communities or professional associations where you go, where you find your peer group. I mean, obviously you build your own connections, but for people in the impact space, what are your favorite events or communities?
I've really benefited from some of the DevX events. I think it brings together a great community, both online and in person. Of course, it's limited to people who are outside the US to do it online, but there are some great ways to connect. I also really have benefited from some of the work I've done in coaching and mentoring. And I think there are quite a few opportunities. We ourselves are working with Dreamy, a mentoring and coaching platform that links different members of our community. And I've now joined as well as a mentor, and I'm starting this week my mentoring and coaching that I used to do professionally within Save the Children. I'm now doing it with the community. Even if you're a mentor, or actually because you're a mentor, it gives you so much back because you're able to help and you're able to listen and open a space, and you learn every single time. So there are lots of great opportunities out there. Craig, I'm sure you know lots of them as well. So that really make an effort to develop your mentoring, your coaching, and your listening skills, because that will help you and it will help others.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, DevX does a lot of great resources and publications and stuff, and Job Board, and Justin just had a couple of us on for one of his panels, and Kate. I mean, DevX is wonderful. For people who might be interested in becoming a coach or getting coaching, any other resources? There's a coaching fellowship, which I think is more geared towards women entrepreneurs, where you can apply to get free access. There's the Humanitarian Coaching Network, but any recommendations for people who want to seek coaching? Because sometimes it could be expensive, sometimes they're subsidized, or any training programs you'd recommend? Or
there are so many out there, and I've had the privilege to take part in them during my time at Save the Children. And I do think the organization invested in that, which I think was a great decision. But looking back, I've mentored and partly coached without the training for the last 15 to 20 years. And it just became a habit to always say yes to that email of a younger professional and always take that call. And now I do it on a 15-minute weekly basis to always offer time, at least, limited to people. And that builds a muscle. It builds a muscle of you listening. And it also builds a muscle of you as sharing what you know, asking questions, and most importantly, increasing and bettering your listening skills. It's a really crucial skill. And I've gotten feedback that, you need to develop that out more because you talk too much.
Yeah, I mean, Catalina will tell, even though I have a PhD, we both have PhDs in conflict resolution, she'll say I'm not a good listener. I can be in some settings. And I do think being able to work with brilliant change makers, whether you're their mentor or mentee or peers, is just such it makes life so much better to be around people who are just radically doing things to make the world better. And so I also find it, that I get to learn so much, not just to become a better listener, but just I can learn about sectors I know nothing about, but it just enriches and excites me because of the passion that other people are doing. So it's also, I'd say, just one addition is like, don't just mentor. I mean, obviously I couldn't mentor someone in mathematics, but I can talk to people in so many different sectors and still sometimes offer help or get help. And even if it's engineering or sanitation, I don't know anything about it. There's something about stepping out of your comfort zone that makes it enriching. So
but maybe let me add one more thing. It's not just the mentoring that you do for others. That's where my Atlas Corps more or less job came from, because I was engaging with people. I was asking questions. I was based in London. I was looking my wife wanted to move back to the US, and I was starting to look for opportunities. So it came from two people who had spoken to me and who had listened to me saying, oh, you should really look at this opportunity because all you talk about is leadership development and talent. And I ended up applying because of those two people who I had engaged with, listened to, they had listened to me, and that's where opportunities come from.
Yep. Yes. And if people haven't read the work by Adam Grant, Give and Take, or his podcast, The Social Psychologist, I think from Penn, it's a really good book about not being a transactional networker or mentor, but really, and there's another great book called Humble Consulting. I forgot the name of the author, but it's like not coming in as the expert, just curiosity. But so a couple of questions came in. One, just can you say the name again of the mentoring platform that you said Atlas Corps is using? Was it Dreamy?
Yes, it's almost it's with an I, dreamy.io.
Okay. Dreamy.io. Okay, it's right there. That's this one, dreamy.io? Yes. Okay. Is that correct, what's showing on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Question from
sorry. Let me post it in. It's dream like dream.
Okay.
And then with like I and then .io.
Okay. Well, you put it in because I'm not getting it correct. So, and then I'll make sure to share with everybody. A question that has come in from Sunil. How to better understand he's based in India working with educators, how to better understand senior leadership vision, ideas and strategies, and mitigate the gap between mid-level professionals and, let's say, senior leadership. So any thoughts, there's like the executive team and the mid-level or junior team, any thoughts about how to better bridge those gaps?
Bridge those gaps. I think the most important thing is that you focus on team culture. I really think that as a team, you want to focus on self-awareness. What am I bringing to the team? What is my potential for growth? Where do I want to go? And if you create that psychological safety and openness, you will see those opportunities. And if you're in a good team, they will help you see those opportunities. I don't know if that helps start answering that question.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to clarify. What type of skills are you currently, so you talked about soccer and basketball, so obviously those are skills like my son, 12-year-old, can beat me in soccer every time now. It's embarrassing, but I go out and more train him because he's just like, if we play a game, there's no hope. But what type of skills are you working on or learning, or whether it's related to professional development or just something you're enjoying totally outside of work?
I'll answer that one, but I want to come back to Sunil's question. This is what we do and why we do it at Atlas Corps, because I do think, and I've experienced that in many organizations, there's bias, right? People don't get into those positions because of bias and because people don't value the kind of experience that people bring from different places. This is what we want to break down, and we want to make that visible, the potential and the talent, and push organizations, right? A lot of organizations in our space talk about localization and equity. Well, that has to do with leadership. If you don't bring the leadership with that experience and with with the ability to see different worlds, it's not going to change. So that's where we want to push organizations. But Craig, one area is I've been trying to get better at ChatGPT because I think it's really relevant, and it really brings back a key skill, which is asking the right questions. And that is very, very helpful for any position, not only leadership positions, but you know, the Einstein quote, if I had to solve the world, I would spend 55 minutes, only an hour, I would spend 55 on defining the right question. So that's one area. I'm really passionate about recruitment and vetting, and I'm learning more and more, and I'm always open for conversations about how to vet talent and how to create, you know, how to de-bias to see people's real and full potential. That's another area that I'm really curious about. And the last one is I'm fascinated to learn more about finance and how you actually scale the products and services while keeping the costs at a reasonable level, because otherwise you can't scale. So that's an area I think with the help of others, I'm learning more and more. And if we're successful, you will see that in the near future. So
stay tuned. I had one of the best professors I've ever had in all of my years. It was at the PhD level. I did a PhD to learn how to do better practice. I wasn't that interested in academics, but I think what I really learned is better questions rather than, you know, I mean, I understand the theories and all that, but a lot of it's like, how do you ask questions, both of myself and the field and people, to better ascertain and determine like what are some challenges and question assumptions. So I don't know, like all that work, and a lot of it was just better questions. And I was doing a workshop for years at Cambridge Business School, and the first thing I would do is this was a project management consulting project. And the first thing I would do is force those student groups, those poor students, to focus on the questions and then go into the why does this problem exist? And so this problem analysis piece and really focusing on the right questions, I think is absolutely crucial for success, because you can waste a lot of time doing the wrong things. Yes. So a related question, we'll wrap up after my 2 or 3 short ones. In terms of the vision of Atlas Core, I mean, there's the vision, there's the reality, but one thing is when you go back to partners and donors, you know, who either fund or help skill or take talent, how do you talk about the impact? You know, so is it that you tell individual stories that person X from Thailand, you know, worked at this organization and built a bigger career and helped influence or employ people? Or are you trying to tell it at a systems level, relationships between alum? Or like, what are some things around the impact that you find most exciting, and where do you aspire to go with it? I mean, what you can share publicly. No, of course. So I don't think there's one specific answer on impact, and it also depends on the person you're talking to and what they're excited and passionate about. I would say, first of all, there are 3 levels. The first level is, do people really grow out of our leadership programs, and based on the surveys we do, but more and more based on the assessments that we do. That's number 1. And for example, the Net Promoter Score that we take from the Virtual Leadership Institute has been 9.5 out of 10. So we're doing something right, especially with those humanitarian professionals who really, for the first time, receive some of the mentoring and well-being coaching. The second piece is a really important impact point is, do organizations want your services, right? Do organizations come to you and are interested in the talent that you present to them? Because it's a social enterprise. They pay us a fee in order to get access to that talent and to have them at their organization for a year. And we've close to doubled our numbers since coming out of the pandemic, which to me is part of impact. And the third one that you mentioned too is, what happens afterwards? And so now we've been doing a lot of research recently on creating all those LinkedIn profiles and links for people who we may have had lost some touch with. And we're now creating this picture of the organizations that since 2006, where people have ended up. And it made me it enabled me to create one of those talent journeys where you can really see for 3, 4, 5 people, they were here, were getting some relevant experience in their home country. Then we were able to create that fellowship experience at a US-based organization. And then you can see it in their LinkedIn progression, right? That signaling of having had that experience led them into leadership roles. And now they're leading organizations
they're affiliated at times with organizations in the US, in Nepal, in Liberia, in Albania. So that really, those stories of how a talent journey led to leadership that makes a difference for others on the ground, in their home country or in their home region or globally, those three levels are, I think, really resonating with people. And it's important not to just focus on one of them because they belong together.
One question around when you're hiring talent for Atlas Core staff positions. Can you talk a little bit about what makes for a competitive application? Like, obviously there's no cookie cutter formula, like do X and you might get an interview or you won't, but any recommendations for what makes someone competitive where they might get an interview, and any other recommendations, whether it's at Atlas Core or some other social enterprise organization, for things that could help a candidate potentially be more competitive?
I would start, again, it goes back to necessary and sufficient. I would start with, you have to have that passion and the outlook to be part of a global community. That whole notion of global citizens, people who want to cross borders, and who, there's a lot of talk about decoupling right now, that countries are turning inwards. We are exactly the opposite antidote to that. We want to connect people. You have to live and breathe. I want to get to know other people, other cultures, other languages, and connect to them. I think that's a prerequisite as part of the passion that we bring to our mission. The second thing, as I mentioned a few times, I really look for self-awareness. Some of the mistakes I've made in hiring have been with lack of self-awareness, where at the end of the day, you realize, I had a sense that that person didn't really know much about their strengths and some of the areas of their challenges, especially in difficult situations. That always comes back to haunt you and bite you. So looking for, what do you know about yourself? How have you applied your own leadership or your own qualities in a crisis situation? That's what I'm really, really looking for. And lastly, it always, always helps if you have had experience working in a different country, because that intercultural notion of putting yourself into other people's shoes, you don't necessarily have to, but it's really, really relevant to have traveled, if you're able to do so, to get out there, or at least to show that you have engaged and worked with others in different environments, because that's when you learn the most about yourself.
Okay. So a question just came in from Nazir, thank you. So what strategies can women use to advocate for their own educational needs, and how can they overcome obstacles and challenges? So any particular recommendations from working with, female Atlas Core fellows, or just in general?
The majority of our fellows is actually female, and but the ones that Nazir is working with at the border to Afghanistan and Pakistan, they actually benefit from working with him. So first and foremost, you should advise us, Nazir. I really think it's that work in creating peers and mentors, especially for women, because that's another, right? There's even more bias than toward people, and not that biases are competing, but the opportunities for women and young girls in many countries are what I've worked on with Save the Children. We now work on with Atlas Core. So creating connections to other women, finding mentors, finding role models, and observing what they do, and keep connecting people. And right now, given our digital space, it's so much more possible to do a lot of this than it was before. And I think that's the first and foremost thing, to invest in people's upskilling, but most importantly, to create a psychological safe place for people who can support each other as a network.
Okay. Wonderful. So just to add to that, so getting back to, obviously, for anybody, we have the PCDN Career Campus. If people are from Afghanistan, just message me. We can get you in. It's a good resource for professionals, and we have some people who are displaced from Afghanistan. But just to put into context, so going back to soccer, which is not as serious an issue as displacement or education, but Colombia, particularly where we live, every place has sexism, and so it's interesting because it's like most girls. Colombian women's or girls soccer is very competitive. Like the under 18 team just did amazing in a global championship in India, but most girls in Colombia don't play soccer, and it's so shocking to me because in the U.S. their soccer is boys, girls, men, women. If anyone follows the new team out of LA, Serena Williams and her husband Alex Ohanian, and her investors and other like it's huge. But in Colombia, it's like at a certain age, girls stop playing soccer because it's not seen as culturally acceptable. And, it's funny that my son has a coach that works with him, was a former female professional soccer player and a sports psychologist. But it's like, if you can create more pathways where other people are doing it to incubate others, it creates that systems change. And so a lot of it is about, how do you provide communities of practice to support each other? I mean, girls soccer can save lives, but it's not the same as education in Afghanistan. But it's like, how do you provide these peer networks and financial support and training? And it's needed everywhere.
Well, on that example, one of our former staff, Brittany Grob, is actually leading Futbolistas in Spain. And all she does is train young women, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, in soccer, and connects them to soccer players. And she's doing great work in Spain, and is connecting a culture that is very soccer driven to create more female players and exactly those pathways, and create mentorships, because you need people to look up to. And if those role models aren't there, try to find them in other countries, because you need to create a pathway. What is my pathway? What could it look like? And all of us have made that experience, right? That you look back, and if I had known this opportunity existed, maybe I would have done a lot more of this earlier in my life or in my career.
Yeah, Impact Hub Medellin, where we used to work out of, just convened the global SDG football kind of meeting, where they brought 300 women soccer players from all over Colombia connected to the SDGs. So like, the more of that, the better. So last question is, if an organization is interested in Atlas Core, I mean, obviously you could benefit from funding, but let's say someone works for an organization, like, how do organizations potentially engage with you? Or what type of, you're looking for organizations to take placements that's just in the US, or what are 2 or 3 things that, if an organization's inspired by your work, how they might engage?
Well, the first and foremost is if they want to partner as a host organization. And now that we're also offering remote fellowships, that's more and more demand, that people say, we're not in the office anymore. Can we actually get a talent? And the answer is yes. The other one is, there's always volunteering opportunities for people who want to be part of our selection committees, who want to help interview. There are host organization ambassadors that we have in many different cities, where you as an individual or you as a team can be part of welcoming someone and doing some of that cultural exchange that is so crucial outside of work, and welcome. And then obviously, we are always looking for partners who want to partner with us on events, who want to partner with us on research, and on that vision to take Atlas Core to scale.
Okay. So Bidjan, thank you so much for generously sharing your time and rich experience and energy and lessons, both related to Atlas Core and talent and impact careers in general. So again, this will be converted to a podcast episode in a few weeks. Please check out Atlas Core. Follow Bidjan. Is your preferred channel LinkedIn, Twitter, and for people to stay LinkedIn? So please follow Bidjan on LinkedIn. Check out Atlas Core, the newsletter. Check out PCDN. And again, consider rating this podcast or any podcast you listen to. Take 20 seconds and rate it to help us all grow. And have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and especially for the current and past Atlas Core Fellows. And have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Look forward to connecting. Thank you, Craig.